name is Alfredo DeVido. My rank was lieutenant, junior grade. The years of service were 1956 through 1960 active, and from 1960 to 1969 inactive. And the reason is that I was unmarried, and at the time in the world, America was involved in two wars. The Korean War was pretty much over, but the Vietnam War was beginning after the French left. And it looked like, as a single healthy male, I would be drafted, since we had the conscription law still in place, that unmarried men would serve a minimum of 2 years via the draft. But I decided that since I was qualified to be in the U.S. Navy Seabees, I preferred that, since it would be related to my profession as an architect, rather than taking the risk of going into the armed services and some job that I wasn't interested in. So I was able to get accepted by the Navy Seabees, which was not easy to do. So I was very pleased to get assigned to the Seabees, accepted by the Seabees. After I was accepted for that, I went immediately to Officer Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island, where in the course of 4 months, they trained you to be an officer. And the courses that we took were basically Navy-oriented courses like seamanship, and engineering, and 3 or 4 other courses. And of course we had to learn how the Navy did things, since that was part of the curriculum as well. The main thing you had to learn how to do was to obey orders, and without question, if you were given those. That was interesting place to be, because we were very disciplined. We had to keep our lockers very neat, and we had to march from classes. We had 6 classes a day, and we marched from one class to another. They were all lecture hall classes. And then we had quiet hours after mess, which is what the meals were called. And in the evening we had 3 hours study hall, in which you were not supposed to talk. There were in our section we had a whole floor of 20 young men like myself, and you had 3 hours, and if you had to talk or do anything, you did it quietly in order not to disturb others. So that was very good, because basically most of us had liberal educations, and we learned a lot of discipline in doing that sort of things to get the job done quietly and efficiently. So after that, at the end of Officer Candidate School, I was commissioned at Newport and got my stripes, as it were, as a lieutenant, as an ensign. That's the lowest rank. And the lowest rank is ensign, U.S. Naval Reserve. And from there, I was then sent to Fort Hueneme, California, which is the school for the Seabees, the engineering corps. And that was after our commission, and that was another, I think, 4 months in the CB school, and that was very nice. It was really relaxing, but again, you learned a lot of things that were specifically addressed to the needs of the Navy. Since the Navy is not only a matter of ships, there are also naval air stations and naval ports that require buildings, and that's what the Seabees do. The Seabees had a very distinguished career in the Second World War, during which they built 900-odd air stations in Europe and island hopping in the Japanese-American War of the Second War. So our motto in the Seabees was can do. And they took that very seriously because the Seabees never regarded anything as being too difficult. Well, the CB school, once I was in uniform and sent to the CB school, the CB school was in Newport. And well, the CB school actually was in California. The officer training was in Newport, as I already mentioned, for 4 months. But the CB school was mainly in engineering. And that was at Port Hueneme, as I mentioned, and that was engineering subjects, mainly things like navigation, damage repair, which we got into, and that had a lot of interesting aspects to it because the Navy has a great program of teaching people who are unfamiliar with ships and the repairs of ships, and some of the exercises were quite interesting. Like, for instance, they had a section of a hull of a ship, and it was in a big indoor swimming pool, as it were, and we had stations on the ship, and what would happen is that we were subjected to a mock air attack, where we all had to hit the deck and lie low while there was airplane noises and bombs exploding and so forth. And then the ship started to list in the water, which is, moving from side to side and rolling. So we all had our jobs for damage control, and my job with 2 other CBs was to plug a hole down in the bottom of the boat. So once we got the order from our commander, we ran down the gangplank with a 2x2 piece of steel with a bolt through it. And there was a big hole in the hull with water rushing in. And we were supposed to, that was our task, was to plug the hole, which we did, and we thought we did a good job. But when we came up on deck, after plugging the hole, the chief that was in charge was shaking his head that we hadn't done it fast enough, and therefore the ship was going to sink anyway. So that was deflating, but in any event, it was interesting to do, and there were a lot of very realistic training things, which presumably would be very, very useful. If, say, you were called upon to abandon ship, what you did, you would have a life jacket and boots, regular uniform on, and they had a indoor pool of, it was about 20 feet square, and they had a couple of sailors in there with long poles to fish you out. And you went in two at a time, and my buddy jumped in as ordered with his vest and his boots and all of that, and he didn't come up, which sort of frightened me, and I saw he was already 12 feet down, and I saw bubbles coming up through the water, and I told the sailor next to me, I said, "I think he's drowning, will you please take him out right now?" And he said, "No, he's got a ways to go." And so, in any event, finally he did jump in and pull him out, and he apparently had panicked going down, and so they had to give him artificial respiration, and then he disappeared from the school because I guess he didn't do it to their satisfaction. When I went in, I did it okay. I was taking off my boots on the way down to the bottom of the pool, and then took off my jacket and swam up, and so I passed that. And there were a lot of things like that. But the end goal was that they wanted to make sure that their officers were able to react with calm and determination in an emergency, because there are a lot of lives, and naval property was at stake, and pride. So the engineering part of it was good. Everyone was qualified, made a lot of friends, and that was good. Once on active duty, I was immediately assigned to Naval Air Station at Sugi, and there I had a lot of very good jobs, because as it turned out, I was the only architect in the Seabees. We had in the Corps of Engineers, we had 6 officers, but I was the only architect, and therefore I was able to handle a lot of work, and they gave me a lot of work, and then when they discovered that I could do it, they gave me even more work, which was fine, because I thrived on that, and a lot of it was very interesting, because at that time the U.S. Navy outsourced most of the construction on the station, other than for classified buildings, of which we had a few, and so I got the opportunity to work with Japanese contractors, which was an education in itself. I learned Japanese, which helped me communicate with them at the time. My opinion of the Japanese is that it is very high. They're very intelligent and very work-oriented, which at the same time they were very polite and very gracious, and all of that was very important to me. So I was able also to move off the station since there was a shortage of quarters. Since Atsugi was actually a former Japanese Navy airstrip, and there were a lot of buildings that needed repair and fixing up and so forth. And I also got a chance to build some new buildings which were quite interesting. For instance, a classified building for aerial torpedoes, and that was quite interesting. And I was able to build most of that. Most of it was built, the unclassified portions were built by Japanese contractors. And everything was urgent and needed to be done fast and needed to be done right the first time. So the work was very interesting. Well, at that time, we were still, on things were relaxing because the American occupation of Japan was actually very peaceful, and I learned a lot of Japan, and the American authorities were worried, and our senior officers were worried that there would be a lot of animosity and resentment at being conquered by the Americans, which proved to be not the case, because the Japanese, I spent some time studying Japanese customs, and once the emperor ordered the Japanese to peacefully cooperate with the occupying Americans, that became a new obligation. And the Japanese people have a very strong sense of obligation, particularly if they get ordered by the emperor. And that showed up very carefully, and they were very welcoming and very helpful. And I had a job that put me in direct contact with Japanese subcontractors, which went fine. Had a lot of work, and I found them very cooperative and friendly, and we all had a good team that did the job. Everything was urgent, and everything had to be done right, and basically we did it. Interesting time, because there were a lot of Atsugi was the base that the carrier groups, the 7th Fleet Carrier Group, would come in and dock at Yokosuka, which was a nearby seaport. If they needed repairs and supplies, they would dock at Yokosuka and get repaired, and naval facility there. But their airplanes would get offloaded, and they would come to Atsugi because pilots of Navy planes have to fly every day to keep their skills sharp. So they would be accommodated. We had some buildings, some I built, quarters for the visiting 7th Fleet pilots, and all of that went smoothly. We needed to do everything very quickly, and we also, the most exciting project that we did was to extend and widen the runway, which was built by the Japanese for the war, but the Japanese airplanes for the Second War were very light, and they didn't have the heavy-duty, heavier airplanes that we had. So part of my job was to make an annual list of maintenance items to be done for the 400-odd buildings that we had on the station. And to do that, I went around and interviewed the users. There was a Marine Air Group at the station. I would talk to various officers in charge of their buildings and ask them what they needed. And they would fill out forms, and I would get them all together and try to assign priorities. And then I had to prepare for my commander's signature a list of priority projects and justifications as to why we were asking Congress for the money. And so I did that, and my commander revised it somewhat. We sent it off to Washington, and in 3 to 4 months they would fund what we requested. Although the most urgent thing was the runway. In my rounds, I discovered it was badly cracking because the American planes were too heavy for what had been designed for the light Japanese planes. So I called my commander and I asked him to come down with me and take a look at it. And he looked at it and agreed with me and ordered me to draft up a message to do an estimate as to what it would cost to overlay the entire runway and to prepare a message for the following day, in which when he reviewed it, he doubled my estimate, which was wise, and we messengered it to Washington. And we had language in it that said that it was a danger to pilots and equipment, and it was urgent. So the Navy Department in Washington funded us the day after, and because they don't, well, if you put urgent in it, then that jumps over everything else. And so then we had to get a contractor and let the drawings and so forth. So I was busy, but it was interesting busy, and I liked it. And I also got the job of doing, as part of war reparations, 7 houses for senior officers in the Japanese, our senior officers on the station. So these hadn't been designed yet, and I got the job of designing them and supervising them with the Japanese, which was unusual, but very exciting to me because I had never really built anything that I had designed. So So I did that, and it all went well, and I learned a lot working with the Japanese, and learned a lot to do it myself. And that enabled me to stay there for my full term of active duty. Normally they sent you back for a different kind of assignment. But I was in the middle of this, and I was liking Japan, so I went to see the Admiral, and since I was designing his house, and asked if he could just extend me for my entire tour of duty in Japan. And the Admiral said that he heard that I was doing a good job on his house. And I said, "I hope so, sir." And he said, "I'll see what I can do." So, in any event, if the Admiral gets what the Admiral wants, and he extended me for my full tour. So that was good. And then afterwards, well, soon afterwards, I still had time to serve, but I was doing other things. But basically, I had to keep in touch with the Navy, and whenever I moved somewhere, I had to keep them in touch via messages at all times, because we were in these wars. The Vietnam War was hotting up, and they wanted to know where their officers were. So that was the story, and that degree of readiness extended for 9 more years. And during the period, I got married, and there were a couple of times that they really wanted to pull me back, but by that time we had children, and so I was able to get that deferred. I don't think they ever voiced any opinion of that. On the other hand, their background, most people know about, and we never discussed it, and it's just not something that anyone discussed or wanted to discuss. If you were part of the military personnel, you obviously had access to classified material, in which case you couldn't talk about it anyway. And you never, just unspoken rule, we never discussed politics with Japanese nationals. We just didn't. Oh, the red thread. Well, it was a little complicated at that time, because Mao Zedong was marching across China at the time, and we were allied with the Chinese nationalists, which were then restricted to Taiwan. And we supported the Taiwanese armed forces, and we had a big air station there, and there were SAC bases, Strategic Air Command bases in Japan and Okinawa, not in Taiwan. And we had Marine air groups at Atsugi, which was where I was stationed, and there was also another Marine air group in Okinawa. I had a good friend who was stationed, posted to Okinawa. So we didn't really discuss politics because we knew a lot about it, but we weren't supposed to talk about it, and we didn't. I didn't have access to much of it because construction is construction. And I didn't really want to know any secrets, because if I didn't know it, then I couldn't talk about it. And that was fine with me. Well, I like Japan a lot, and still do. I think they're intelligent, basically good people who have a strong sense of obligation, first to the emperor, and Japanese people are very insular in the sense that they've lived on an island for centuries, and they have a very considerate and intelligent view toward each other, and certainly a code of dealing with foreigners. I found the Japanese to be good people. Well, the 7 houses for senior officers was the only one that I was really able to design. And for that I worked with the Japanese Construction Bureau and got a commendation from them, which I gave you. And however, everything was interesting in its own way. Certain projects were classified, and I just built the buildings. And most of the work that I did was fairly ordinary repairs of old Japanese buildings, fixing leaks. The runway was very exciting. The runway extension was very exciting because it was still in use while we were pouring concrete, and that got exciting from time to time. A plane was hurt or something. It was coming in very low, and we thought he was going to land among the construction workers because he was coming in very short. So I gave the order to jump into the hole, and so we all jumped into the hole. And as it was, he had his landing gear down, and he sheared off his landing gear, which was already extended, and then sparked his way down the runway without wheels for a couple of 100 yards. And we were all a little worried that he might explode, but he didn't. He finally came to a stop, and the pilot jumped out and ran. And but it didn't blow up. That was exciting. But other than that, everything went very smoothly. The Japanese are excellent workers, careful workers, and we did that kind of work. No, at that time, the Korean War was pretty much over, and the Vietnamese War, we weren't yet involved. The French were pulling out, and I I didn't really know very much about it. We were establishing a presence, but we weren't at war with the Vietnamese. Basically, we were allied with the Taiwanese Chinese. There was a lot of things going on that I heard about it without really wanting to know about it, because the whole of the Western Pacific at that time was turmoil. There were things going on in Indonesia. There were the revolutions in China. Southeast Asia was utter chaos, and China was expanding. So there were a lot of the only things that I was involved in is that there would be periodic alerts or emergency type construction that I had to take care of. I was in charge of the construction of a building for aerial torpedoes, which had a very tight schedule for that, and but I wasn't cleared for the, obviously these aerial torpedoes were nuclear tipped, but that wasn't my clearance and it wasn't my business, so I basically built the building and handed over the keys to special forces from the United States, a bunch of Americans who came and did the nuclear thing. But there again, I just did the construction unclassified, and that was fine with me. Well, most of it was peaceful. I was able to move off station, which was very exciting because we had a shortage of bachelor officer quarters, and for the first 3 or 4 months they stuck me in a Quonset hut, which are cold in the winter and boiling in the summer, and this was without air conditioning, and those were 4 officers to a Quonset hut, and one of my fellow officers was a slob, and I tried to reform him without success. But in any event, we would restrict him to his room, the other 3 of us. So that was interesting, and I was able to get my allowance for quarters, and by that time I had learned a little bit about Japan, and I was working with Japanese. So I found a house in Kamakura, and I had a little car, a Volkswagen, and I was able to get my allowance for quarters and rent the whole house in Kamakura, and that was good because I could have the advantage of a Japanese house out in Japan, which was a lot better than the Japanese air station. And so I commuted back and forth, and then I was also able to take some time off, and I traveled around Asia, which was good, since I could offer to be a courier for classified material in order to get a free ride on an American plane. So I did that, and I was able to get to India and Southeast Asia, and trips to Hong Kong and all over Japan by hitchhiking, as it were, as a courier. And so that worked, yeah. And I found it very interesting. In Japan, I made a point of visiting many of their monuments because MacArthur, who was the general who was in charge of Japan at the end of World War II, made the decision that we would not destroy any buildings that were sacred to Japan, which was very wise. MacArthur knew the Japanese, he knew their traditions, and he specifically intervened to allow the Japanese to keep the emperor, because a lot of the American forces, the higher ups in the forces wanted to do away with the emperor. But MacArthur was pivotal in the sense that he said, no, that's the wrong thing to do, because the most important thing to the Japanese people is their allegiance to their emperor. And proof was that when the emperor ordered the Japanese to surrender at the end of World War II, they did so immediately, and there were no incidents at all, because the obligation to fight to the death for the emperor became a new obligation to not fight. And it was totally peaceful, which was good, and cooperative, and so the most interesting thing I found was learning about the Japanese people. And being an architect, the Japanese have always had a reputation among architects for having done modern architecture 900 years ago. So I would take leave, and of course the Japanese house, in the eyes of architects, was regarded as the first modern architecture 900 years ago, which it was, because it was very simple. It wasn't cluttered up with a lot of heavy furniture. Everything was very, very simple and beautiful. And the gardens were something I got deeply interested in, because the gardening for the Japanese is a very important part of their life. And you don't really actually play in the gardens in active, you don't play ball or anything like that, but they're basically for contemplation. And when I got a house of my own, I asked a Japanese friend to find me a house with a little garden, which he did, and I had a little garden of my own, and it's quite nice. Except for the neighbor who did, Japanese neighbor who did exercises at 6 in the morning. Very loud radio was on, counting the exercises. But in any event, I had to leave at 6 a.m. anyway, so it didn't bother me all that much. And that was good, yeah. Cold, because I rented a unheated Japanese house. The Japanese houses did not have central heat. So I had an electric hibachi, which I still froze, but in any event, it was what I wanted. Oh yeah, and then some. Yeah, I had a very interesting time in all aspects. Yeah, had a good job. Met lots of interesting people, and learned about Japan. Oh, yes, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, because post-war, no one really knew the Japanese, and the occupying generals and admirals didn't know what to expect, because the Japanese have always been insular, and the Japanese culture has always been insular, and their sense of obligation to each other and to the emperor is not something that is understood by Americans, because in America we have a democracy, and we can have a president for 4 or 8 years and representatives in the government, but the Japanese system is very traditional. The emperor stays until death, and then another one takes over. Although it's changed in a lot of ways, but still their customs and their sense of obligation to family and country and friends is very strong. And that's something that Americans don't understand, because we've had a nation of immigrants and changing scenarios. Well, I didn't really understand it. I read a lot of books, but at the time it was very much still post-war, and it was still under martial law. The martial law ended, I think, while I was there at some point, which didn't do anything as far as I was concerned, but the Japanese took more of their own responsibilities on to themselves, since the American occupying authorities thought that the Japanese were ready to do that, and that had always been the plan. We had no reason, so we concluded a peace treaty approximately the time I was there, and instead of being enemies, they were allies, and they had their own so-called self-defense forces, because the Japanese had nothing. No, I don't look back. There's no gain in that. Important thing to me is to keep looking forward. That's the best way. If you have a mishap, if you have a problem, misunderstanding, best thing to do is to turn your back and move on. One thing I tried to do while I was there is to establish contact with other architects, which was a very interesting time. Like, for instance, there was an American architect who had practiced in Japan before the war, named Antono Raymond, and he had been an Austrian, I think. And Antono Raymond had married a Japanese and had a Tokyo office. So I looked him up, wrote him a letter, and found his address, and asked if he would mind a visit to his office, and he was very welcoming and had me in for an all day, showed me what he was doing, and we talked, and I learned a lot from him. And I also did the same with, I got some leave and I went to Southeast Asia, to Thailand and India, and I also found architects in those places. What I do is write blind to the Architectural Association in those places and explain what I was up to and that I was interested in Thai and or Indian architecture, and could I visit them. And I did that, and it was always very rewarding because they were very welcoming, and they were very pleased that I was interested in their work, their culture, and so forth. So I did that, and it was a lot of fun. I also spent a lot of time going to places in Japan, like Hokkaido in the north, and there's a whole bunch of other cities that really hadn't been bombed very much. Although I did visit the ruins of Hiroshima, which was very sobering, and the imagery was very powerful at that time. When I visited the ruins of Hiroshima, actually there weren't any ruins because everything had been burned up, with the exception of one brick building. It was the only one standing, which is very sobering. Then I went to the northern island, Hokkaido, which has an indigenous population that is called the Ainu, A-I-N-U. They're very hairy, the Ainu, and they have full beards and a lot of hair. And the Japanese are very hairless. Actually, they don't have a lot of hair. Women do, of course, but most men don't have hair much. And I found it very interesting learning the different customs and different ethnic backgrounds, and they were happy to talk about it. They assumed that I wouldn't be interested for some reason, and I also was able to do a lot of work, like the Admiral's conference room, and subsequently his house and the senior officers. And I also enjoyed my daily work on the station, because we had a lot of tasks, from buildings to blast fences for testing jet engines, because the Navy decided that when jet engines for fighter planes needed repair, that it was too expensive to ship them all the way back to the United States. So they came in and installed a facility, and that was interesting. And I got to see how that was done, and my contractors built the non-classified parts of that. So basically my work was of interest, and my work was with the Japanese, and time off was with the Japanese. So I enjoyed every minute. I think they accepted it. The important thing to the Japanese was their obligation to the emperor, and it was over, and there was no feeling of animosity that I ever detected. Japanese are very proud, and the Americans are very proud. And I thought we got along quite well. We didn't have many incidents of a bad kind between Americans and Japanese. Practically never. I was division officer for, I guess it was a 6-month, 9-month period, which put me in charge of 50 enlisted men, sailors. And I suggested to them that they go out and see the cultural aspects of Japan rather than going to the sleazy bars right outside the gate, and that I would be happy to talk to them individually and suggest things that they might do, cultural things, rather than just hanging out in little towns. And drinking too much. So most of them took me up on it. I think we're just about wound up. I was talking about my work in the air station, which was very diverse and interesting by and large because everything was different. And the requirements for all the users were different. One of the things that we had there was one of the infamous U-2s, which was the spy airplane. We had a squadron of U-2s, and they were a very closed-mouthed group of pilots, but they also had the best food. They had their own mess, and so whenever I had the duty and wasn't at my house in Kamakura, I would go over and eat with the outfit that ran the U-2s because the food was better. But in any event, the U-2 pilots were there, and I pretty much knew what they were doing. But in any event, I enjoyed watching their airplanes take off because they were like big gliders, painted black, beautiful airplanes. And they would use about a quarter of the runway and then go practically straight up, and which is very interesting. And then there was always something new to see and people to meet. And then I enjoyed Japan. I used to like to just go downtown in Tokyo and walk around, which was always interesting because I spoke some Japanese, and a lot of times people would be pleased if I spoke some Japanese, and they would be very interested in talking to me. So I made a lot of acquaintances like that, and that was always interesting. Yeah, but there were absolutely zero adverse incidents. The Japanese are very polite, courteous people, and they do not seek conflict. And I'm the same way, so we never had a problem. I did have a problem with some of my enlisted men who would go to these sleazy bars right outside the gate and drink too much. And but most of them were good kids. And kids, I mean, I was, in my early 20s, and they were 17 and 18. But they were my division sailors, and I used to encourage them to go to the kabuki and cultural events, the museums and so forth. And I suggested good hotels, and I could give them passes because going in and out from the station in one day was too much. So I would encourage them, the ones that were receptive, I would give them an overnight pass so they could have Saturday and Sunday if they didn't have the duty, and go to a museum, go to a kabuki, and just look around rather than going to some sleazy bar and drinking. And most of them took me up on it. We had one or two that were not so good, but pretty much we got rid of them. Yeah, quietly and fast. That's a very difficult question that could take volumes, each one. But if you take the Chinese first, at that time, Mao Zedong had pretty much conquered the mainland of China and wanted to invade Taiwan, which is where Chiang Kai-shek was, with 3 armored divisions in Taiwan, and we were allied with Chiang Kai-shek at that time, and that was a source of tension because Mao Zedong had 3 armored divisions ready to cross the straits, and he came very close to letting them, but the thing that kept him from doing it was basically us, the 7th Fleet, because he would probably fail in an effort to the mainland Chinese on Taiwan were very well armed, and we had the 7th Fleet, so he decided that he wouldn't be successful. So he didn't do it. And in Southeast Asia, the French had just left. In fact, they had been defeated at Dien Bien Phu. Dien Bien Phu was where the French were beaten by the Viet Cong, and they shortly evacuated thereafter. And somehow we got involved with taking over their job and defending the so-called free Vietnamese against the Viet Cong, because at that time, politically, the Viet Cong were communists, and it was very complicated. But in any event, that was the situation. And however, I went down there, and I was by myself and on leave, and made some friends and talked to some people, and I always found that interesting because without trying to be provocative, I would always ask questions and just listen, which was very interesting to find out the on-the-spot opinion of educated people and so forth. And I went to India and Southeast Asia. I had written ahead to the Architectural Association in Thailand, just cold, and said that I was an architect visiting their country, and would they be kind enough to let me know what was available to see, and since I didn't know anything about it. And back came a long letter from two princes. They had royalty at the time, and they said, well, when you come, you're going to be our guest, and we'll take you around. And I thought that was a good deal, and they were very gracious. They were brothers, and both architects, and so they took me all over Thailand and up north to some sites that normally don't go to, and we had a good time. And the same thing happened in India. Wrote to architects again, and they were very welcoming, and provided me a guide in Delhi. And I heard that I was one of, I think, 2,000 total visitors in India at that time, foreigners, which was interesting. And of course, the Indians are very good in English. They speak the King's English from the years of occupation with the British. But I wasn't particularly interested in politics, and just interested in the country, and traveled around and so forth, talking to business people and learning about India. And I was a curiosity, as it were, since they didn't see that many foreigners, because I always wanted to see the monuments of India, which I had read up on, and I went where foreigners normally didn't go, because the British were very insular when they occupied India, and they just weren't interested. Being British, they thought that the only civilization in the world was British, which was not true. But that was, and then I did a lot of traveling in Japan. I got very interested in pottery, and we have a lot of that, and so I had this little car, and I went to the famous potting towns and met the famous Hamida, who was the leader of a pottery group. And I also met a couple of modern artists in Japan that I sought out, and they were very welcoming again. And what I was doing, I guess, was very unusual, because most of the occupying group simply wasn't interested. But on the other hand, I was an architect and interested in art, and so I was different, and I wanted to do and see. I didn't want to go to bars and get drunk. I didn't have time for that. So that was the story, yeah. Yes, we went back a couple of times. I took Kathy once or twice, and now, of course, Rob is over there, and one of these days we'll get over there and see him.